Our innocent family tradition, letting cousins duel with BB guns, was illegal. One got injured, and I was arrested for child endangerment. Growing up in rural Kentucky, our family reunions were legendary affairs that brought together 4 generations of the Thompson clan from across 3 states. Every August, we'd descend on my great-uncle Earl's 100-acre farm outside Bowling Green, where cousins who hadn't seen each other all year would reconnect through a series of time-honored traditions that had been passed down since my grandfather's generation. There were the harmless activities that every family reunion featured: potato sack races, watermelon seed spitting contests, and enough fried chicken to feed a small army. But the Thompson family also had some unique traditions that reflected our rural heritage and our belief that kids needed to learn self-reliance and responsibility from an early age. The most popular of these traditions was what we called cousin duels, structured competitions between the kids using BB guns that had been in the family for decades. These weren't chaotic free-for-alls or dangerous gunfights. They were carefully organized events with safety rules, protective gear, and adult supervision that taught the younger generation about firearm safety, sportsmanship, and family history. My grandfather started these duels back in the 1940s. Uncle Earl would explain to newcomers or family members who'd married into the clan. It was his way of teaching the boys, and eventually the girls too, how to handle weapons responsibly while having some fun and building character. The rules were strict and had been refined over decades of family gatherings. Participants had to be at least 10 years old and demonstrate basic gun safety knowledge before being allowed to participate. They wore safety glasses and thick jackets, used only low-powered BB guns that fired soft plastic pellets, and competed in structured events with clear boundaries and safety protocols. Safety first, always, was Uncle Earl's constant refrain. These duels are about learning respect for weapons and developing good judgment under pressure. Anyone who can't follow the rules doesn't get to participate. The competitions themselves were diverse and designed to test different skills. There were target shooting contests where accuracy mattered more than speed, timed events where participants had to hit multiple targets in sequence, and the most popular competition, formal duels where 2 cousins would face off in a structured showdown modeled after old Western movies. For the formal duels, participants would stand back to back, walk 10 paces in opposite directions, then turn and fire at targets mounted on hay bales rather than at each other. The person who hit their target first won the duel and advanced to the next round of competition. It was exciting, competitive, and completely safe since no one was ever shooting at another person. The targets keep it safe while still teaching kids about focus, pressure, and fair competition, my father explained when I was old enough to participate in my first duel at age 12. Plus it gives them a connection to family history and traditions that go back generations. I loved everything about the cousin duels. The ceremony of cleaning and inspecting the BB guns before each competition, the formal rules that made it feel important and significant, the way the adults treated participants with respect and seriousness when they demonstrated good judgment and safety awareness. Most of all, I loved the way it connected me to my extended family and made me feel like part of something bigger than myself. By the time I was 28 and had kids of my own, I'd become one of the primary organizers of the cousin duels. My 10-year-old daughter Emma and 8-year-old son Jake were both eager to participate in the family tradition, and I was excited to share something that had been such a positive part of my own childhood with the next generation. "Are you sure this is safe?" my wife Jennifer asked as we drove to Kentucky for the 2023 family reunion. She'd grown up in suburban Atlanta and found some of our rural traditions more concerning than charming. "Jen, I've been doing this since I was 12 years old," I assured her. 3 generations of Thompson kids have participated in these duels without anyone getting seriously hurt. Uncle Earl runs them like a military operation. Safety is the absolute top priority. "I just worry about kids and guns, even BB guns," she said. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing's going to go wrong," I replied confidently. "These aren't real guns, the safety protocols are foolproof, and we have adults supervising every aspect of the competition. It's actually safer than most of the activities kids do at summer camp." I believed that completely. The cousin duels had been happening for over 70 years without any serious incidents. We used the lowest powered BB guns available, required extensive safety gear, and maintained strict adult supervision at all times. The activities were structured, educational, and designed to teach responsibility rather than encourage reckless behavior. What I didn't realize was that the world had changed significantly since my childhood, and activities that had been considered normal family fun in rural Kentucky during the 1990s were now viewed very differently by law enforcement, child protective services, and the general public. The 2023 reunion started exactly like every other family gathering I remembered. Uncle Earl gave his traditional safety lecture to all the kids who wanted to participate in the duels, demonstrating proper handling techniques and explaining the rules that had kept everyone safe for decades. The older cousins helped the younger ones learn to load and aim their BB guns, and everyone practiced on targets to make sure they understood how the equipment worked. Remember, these are real weapons, even if they're not lethal, Uncle Earl told the assembled group of 12 kids ranging in age from 10 to 16. You treat them with the same respect you'd show any firearm, you never point them at anything you don't intend to shoot, and you follow instructions immediately and without question. The kids listened with the seriousness that comes from knowing they're being trusted with something important. Emma and Jake were among the most attentive, having heard stories about the cousin duels for years and eager to finally be old enough to participate. The competition started with basic target shooting, allowing everyone to get comfortable with their equipment and demonstrate their safety knowledge. The atmosphere was festive but controlled, with adults constantly monitoring to ensure that all safety protocols were being followed. "Looking good out there," I told Emma after she successfully hit 3 targets in a row during the accuracy competition. "Grandpa would be proud of how well you're handling yourself. This is the best family reunion ever," she replied, her face glowing with pride and excitement. "I can't wait to tell my friends about the cousin duels." The formal duels were scheduled for the afternoon, and by lunchtime we had 8 participants ready to compete in the traditional back-to-back, 10 paces, turn-and-shoot format that had been the highlight of family reunions for generations. The matchups were designed to be fair, pairing kids of similar ages and experience levels against each other. Emma was matched against her cousin Brady, my brother's 12-year-old son who had participated in the duels the previous year. They were both excited about the competition and had been friendly rivals in other family activities throughout the weekend. "This is going to be epic," Brady said as they prepared for their duel. "I've been practicing all year for this. May the best cousin win," Emma replied with a grin. The formal duel format required participants to stand back-to-back in the center of a marked area, with their targets positioned 30 feet away in opposite directions. On Uncle Earl's command, they would walk 10 paces away from each other, turn, and fire at their respective targets. The first person to hit their target would be declared the winner and advance to the next round. "Safety check," Uncle Earl called out, inspecting both kids' equipment and protective gear one final time. "Weapons unloaded until you reach your positions. Safety glasses secure. Remember, you're shooting at targets only, never at people, never at anything except your designated target." Emma and Brady nodded seriously, understanding the importance of following every safety protocol exactly as they'd been taught. "Participants, take your positions," Uncle Earl commanded. Emma and Brady stood back-to-back in the center of the dueling area, their unloaded BB guns pointed safely toward the ground. The rest of the family gathered around the edges of the marked boundaries, excited to watch the traditional competition that had been a highlight of family reunions for as long as anyone could remember. "Load your weapons," Uncle Earl instructed. Both kids loaded their BB guns with the plastic pellets, following the safety procedures they'd practiced dozens of times that weekend. 10 paces, begin. Emma and Brady began walking away from each other, counting their steps carefully as they moved toward their respective firing positions. The atmosphere was tense with excitement, but also focused and controlled thanks to the strict safety protocols that governed every aspect of the competition. 8, 9, 10. Turn and fire. What happened next unfolded so quickly that it took several seconds for anyone to fully understand what had gone wrong. Emma and Brady both turned and raised their BB guns toward their targets, but in the excitement and adrenaline of the moment, Brady's turn was off by about 15 degrees. Instead of facing his target directly, he was angled slightly toward where Emma was standing. When he fired, the plastic BB didn't hit his target, it hit Emma in the left eye. The scream that came from my daughter was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. She dropped her BB gun and fell to her knees, both hands pressed against her face, blood seeping between her fingers as she cried in pain and terror. "Emma," I ran toward her, my heart hammering with panic as I tried to assess how badly she was hurt. "Baby, let me see. Let Daddy look at your eye. It hurts so bad," she sobbed, too afraid to move her hands away from her face. "I can't see anything. Dad, I can't see." The chaos that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced during a reunion. Adults were shouting instructions, kids were crying, and Uncle Earl was trying to maintain order while calling for emergency medical assistance. Brady was standing frozen in shock, still holding his BB gun, unable to process what had just happened. "Someone call 911, Jennifer screamed, reaching Emma at the same time I did. "We need an ambulance right now." "I'm so sorry," Brady kept repeating, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean to hit her. I was aiming at my target. I'm so sorry, Emma." The ambulance arrived within 20 minutes, but it felt like hours as we tried to comfort Emma and assess the extent of her injury. The paramedics were professional and efficient, but I could see the concern in their expressions as they examined her eye and prepared her for transport to the regional medical center. "Sir, we need to get her to the hospital immediately," the lead paramedic told me. "This type of eye injury can be very serious, and time is critical for preserving her vision." Jennifer rode in the ambulance with Emma while I followed in our car, my mind racing with worry about my daughter's injury and growing dread about the potential consequences of the accident. In all the years of cousin duels, nothing like this had ever happened. We'd had minor scrapes and bruises, but never a serious injury, never an accident that required emergency medical attention. At the hospital, Emma was immediately taken into surgery to repair damage to her cornea and assess whether the BB had caused any internal damage to her eye. The surgeon, Dr. Patricia Martinez, explained that while the injury was serious, Emma was likely to recover most of her vision with proper treatment and follow-up care. "She's very lucky," Dr. Martinez told us after the 3-hour surgery. The BB hit her cornea but didn't penetrate deeply enough to cause permanent damage to the structures inside her eye. She'll need several weeks of recovery time and ongoing monitoring, but her prognosis is good. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly overshadowed by the arrival of 2 police officers and a social worker from Child Protective Services who wanted to ask questions about the circumstances that had led to Emma's injury. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Officer Sarah Johnson with the Warren County Sheriff's Department," one of the officers introduced herself. "We need to talk to you about the incident involving your daughter and what we understand was some kind of organized activity involving children and weapons." "It was a family tradition," I explained, still trying to process the fact that law enforcement was treating this as a criminal matter rather than an unfortunate accident. "We've been doing these activities for over 70 years without any serious incidents. It was completely supervised, with extensive safety protocols. Sir, regardless of your family's history with these activities, allowing children to use weapons in any kind of competitive format constitutes child endangerment under Kentucky state law," Officer Johnson explained. "We're going to need you to come with us for questioning." "Child endangerment?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Officer, this was a supervised activity with safety gear and adult oversight. It was an accident, not criminal negligence. The law doesn't distinguish between intentional endangerment and negligent endangerment when it comes to children and weapons," the social worker, Ms. Rebecca Collins, interjected. "Your daughter sustained a serious injury that required emergency surgery as a result of an activity that you organized and supervised. That meets the legal definition of child endangerment." What followed was the most surreal and terrifying experience of my life. While my daughter was recovering from eye surgery, I was being arrested, read my rights, and transported to the Warren County Jail for booking on charges of child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. "This is insane," I told the public defender assigned to my case during our first meeting. "This was a family tradition with decades of safe practice. One accident doesn't make it criminal negligence." "Mr. Thompson, I understand your perspective, but the law is very clear about activities involving children and weapons," Attorney David Walsh explained. "In today's legal environment, any adult who allows children to use firearms or firearm-like weapons in an unsupervised or competitive context can be charged with endangerment, especially if someone gets hurt." "But it wasn't unsupervised," I protested. "We had adults watching every aspect of the activity. We used safety gear, low-powered equipment, and protocols that had worked safely for decades." "Unfortunately, supervision and safety equipment don't necessarily constitute a defense against endangerment charges," Walsh replied. "The prosecutor's argument will be that allowing children to participate in any activity involving weapons inherently creates an unreasonable risk of harm, regardless of precautions taken." The criminal charges were just the beginning of my legal problems. Child Protective Services opened an investigation into my fitness as a parent, questioning whether someone who would allow children to participate in weapon-based activities could be trusted to make appropriate decisions about child safety and welfare. "We're not saying you're a bad parent," Ms. Collins explained during one of several interviews. "But we have to evaluate whether your judgment about age-appropriate activities aligns with current standards for child safety and protection." "Current standards?" I asked. "These activities have been happening in rural communities for generations. This was normal childhood activity in the context where I grew up. Times have changed, Mr. Thompson. What was considered acceptable in previous generations may not meet today's standards for child safety and responsible parenting. The media attention that followed my arrest was devastating for our family. The story of the Kentucky man arrested for organizing children's gun duels made national news, with most coverage focusing on the sensational aspects of the story rather than the context and safety precautions that had governed our family tradition. Father arrested after child shot during family gun competition, read one headline. Rural Kentucky family's dangerous tradition sends girl to hospital, proclaimed another. The comment sections on news articles were filled with outrage and judgment from people who had never heard of our family traditions and couldn't understand how anyone could think it was appropriate to involve children in activities with BB guns. What kind of parent allows kids to shoot at each other? One commenter wrote. This is exactly why we need stronger laws protecting children from irresponsible adults. These people are living in the past, another added. Just because something was a tradition doesn't mean it was safe or appropriate. That poor little girl could have been killed. Reading these comments, I began to understand that our family traditions, which had seemed completely normal and safe within our rural context, were being viewed by the broader public as dangerous anachronisms that had no place in modern society. The legal proceedings dragged on for 8 months, during which time I was prohibited from supervising any activities involving my own children and weapons of any kind, including BB guns, pellet guns, or even toy guns that fired projectiles. CPS maintained ongoing oversight of our family, requiring regular home visits and interviews to monitor my compliance with safety requirements. This is destroying our family, Jennifer told me during one particularly difficult conversation. Emma's recovery is going well, but Jake is confused about why Daddy can't play certain games with him anymore. And I'm being treated like I'm married to a criminal. I know, I replied, feeling the weight of guilt and frustration that had become my constant companions. I never imagined that a family tradition could be considered criminal behavior. I was just trying to share something positive from my own childhood with our kids. I understand that, but maybe our parents' generation didn't fully appreciate the risks involved in these activities, Jennifer said gently. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that some traditions need to evolve with changing times and safety standards. The plea bargain I eventually accepted included probation, community service focused on child safety education, and mandatory attendance at a parenting class about age-appropriate activities and risk assessment. The charges were reduced from felonies to misdemeanors in exchange for my guilty plea, but the conviction would remain on my record permanently. You're getting off relatively easy, my attorney explained. The prosecutor could have pushed for jail time and permanent loss of custody rights. This outcome allows you to maintain your parental rights while acknowledging that your judgment in this situation fell short of legal standards. I still don't understand how a tradition that worked safely for 70 years suddenly became criminal behavior, I said. Society's understanding of child safety has evolved significantly over the past few decades, Walsh replied. Activities that were considered normal in previous generations are now viewed as unnecessarily risky or inappropriate for children. The law has evolved to reflect those changing standards. Emma's recovery was successful, and she regained full vision in her injured eye within 6 months of the accident. But the psychological impact of the incident, combined with the stress of the legal proceedings and media attention, affected our entire family in ways that extended far beyond her physical injury. I don't want to do anything with guns ever again, Emma told me during one of our conversations about the incident. Even toy guns scare me now. I keep thinking about how much it hurt and how scared I was. Brady, the cousin who had accidentally shot her, struggled with guilt and trauma that required professional counseling. Despite everyone's assurances that the accident wasn't his fault, he blamed himself for not following safety protocols perfectly and felt responsible for the legal consequences that had befallen our family. It was my fault that Uncle Mike got arrested, he told his parents. If I had been more careful, none of this would have happened. The extended Thompson family was also deeply affected by the incident and its aftermath. Uncle Earl, who had overseen decades of safe cousin duels, felt personally responsible for not anticipating how changed legal and social standards might affect our traditional activities. I should have realized that times had changed, he said during our conversation after my sentencing. What seemed like harmless family fun in my generation had become legally dangerous in yours. I should have protected you from this situation. The cousin duels, which had been a cherished family tradition for over 70 years, were permanently discontinued after 2023. The legal liability, insurance concerns, and changed social attitudes made it impossible to continue the activities that had once brought our family together and connected us to our rural heritage. It's the end of an era, my father said sadly. Those duels taught generations of Thompson kids about responsibility, safety, and family history. Now they're just another tradition that can't survive in the modern world. Looking back on the incident 3 years later, I have complicated feelings about what happened and the consequences that followed. On one hand, I understand that I was legally responsible for an activity that resulted in a child being seriously injured, and I accept that modern safety standards are different from those of previous generations. On the other hand, I struggle with the criminalization of activities that had been safely practiced by my family for decades and had provided positive experiences for multiple generations of children. The accident that injured Emma was genuinely that, an accident that occurred despite extensive safety precautions and adult supervision. Do you regret organizing the cousin duels that year? Jennifer asked me recently. I regret that Emma got hurt, I replied. I regret that our family traditions caused legal problems and media attention that affected everyone we care about. But I don't regret trying to share something meaningful from my childhood with our kids. Even knowing how it turned out. Sometimes the things that matter most come with risks that previous generations accepted but current generations won't tolerate. That doesn't necessarily mean the previous generations were wrong, it just means the world has changed. Today, our family reunions continue, but they look very different from the gatherings of my childhood. The activities are safer, more supervised, and more aligned with current standards for child safety and appropriate recreation. We've found new traditions that bring the family together without exposing anyone to legal liability or social controversy. But I still miss the cousin duels, and I still believe that they provided valuable lessons about responsibility, family heritage, and personal growth that are difficult to replicate through other activities. The fact that they became legally problematic doesn't necessarily mean they were morally wrong or educationally worthless. Emma, now 13, has no interest in firearms or shooting sports of any kind, which is completely understandable given her traumatic experience. Jake, now 11, sometimes asks about the cousin duels and whether he'll ever get to participate in activities like the ones his older cousins experienced. Maybe when you're older we can find ways to teach you about firearms safety in contexts that are legal and appropriate, I tell him. But probably not competitive activities, and definitely not anything that looks like the old family traditions. The conviction on my record has created ongoing challenges for employment, volunteer opportunities, and other activities that require background checks. Being labeled as someone who endangered children affects how others perceive my judgment and character, even when they understand the context and circumstances of the incident. It's not fair that one accident, one moment of bad timing, can define someone's entire reputation, Jennifer observed recently. You're a good father who made a decision based on decades of safe practice, but now you're treated like someone who deliberately put children at risk. She's right, but fairness isn't always the governing principle in legal proceedings or social judgments. Sometimes good people make decisions that have terrible consequences, and those consequences become part of their permanent record regardless of their intentions or previous behavior. The cousin duels that seem so innocent and traditional in the context of our rural family heritage were revealed to be legally dangerous activities that exposed children to risks that modern society considers unacceptable. Whether that represents progress in child safety or the loss of valuable traditions probably depends on your perspective and life experience. What I know for certain is that traditions that survive for generations can disappear overnight when circumstances change, and that activities we consider harmless can be viewed as criminal by others who don't share our context and background. The accident that injured Emma and led to my arrest was the result of a split-second mistake during an activity that had been safely practiced for decades. But in today's legal and social environment, that distinction doesn't matter as much as the fact that a child was hurt during an activity involving weapons, regardless of the precautions taken or the intentions involved. Some traditions are worth preserving despite changing times, but others may need to be retired when the risks outweigh the benefits or when society's standards evolve beyond what those traditions can accommodate. The cousin duels were probably one of those traditions that needed to end, even though letting go of them meant losing something that had connected our family across generations and taught valuable lessons that are harder to learn in safer environments. Sometimes progress requires sacrifice, even when that sacrifice involves giving up things that were meaningful and positive in their proper context. And sometimes people pay prices for decisions that seemed reasonable at the time but are judged harshly by different standards in different circumstances. That's what happened to our family tradition, and that's what happened to me.